If Adam and Eve were the first humans, then the question of whom Cain married remains one of the most intriguing mysteries that has haunted believers and fueled skeptics for millennia. Scripture clearly states that Cain had a wife, yet nowhere does it explain her origin. Critics often cite this apparent contradiction as the greatest gap in the biblical narrative, while churches tend to avoid the topic and scholars sidestep it. But what if the answer was never lost, only hidden in plain sight, waiting to be rediscovered? What if the forgotten daughters of Adam and Eve were never truly forgotten, but their names were deliberately erased from the book of Genesis, preserved instead in ancient texts the church has been reluctant to disclose? In the beginning of time, long before kingdoms arose, languages diverged, prophets emerged, or laws were given, there was the Garden of Eden. In that garden, divine breath awakened humanity's first heartbeat. According to Genesis, God formed Adam from the dust of the ground with his own hands. Yet Adam was not truly alive until God himself breathed into his nostrils. That breath carried more than mere air. It carried spirit, purpose, and individuality. Can you imagine being the first to experience love, to speak words, to feel the warmth of the sun and the coolness of Eden's rivers? Soon after, God realized it was not good for man to be alone. While Adam slept, God took one of his ribs and fashioned a companion, not from dust this time, but from Adam's very bone and flesh. Thus, Eve, the first woman, came into being. Their union was not merely the first marriage, but the first covenant between humanity and God. In time, Adam and Eve became parents. Among their children were two sons whose names echo through the ages: Cain and Abel. Cain chose the path of a farmer, diligently tilling the soil and drawing sustenance from the earth. Abel became a Meta, Sex 2.0. As they grew, both brothers brought offerings to God. Cain presented the fruits of the ground, the labor of his hands. Abel offered the firstborn of his flock, selecting the finest and most precious. Scripture records that the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but Cain's gift found no such acceptance. Why did God accept one sacrifice and reject the other? Many believe the key lies not in the offering itself, but in the heart behind it. Abel's sacrifice was the best he had, chosen with care, offered with reverence, and filled with sincere love. Cain's offering, though a contribution, lacked that same distinction. True worship is not merely ritual. It is the condition of the heart behind the sacrifice. Cain's heart, once proud, began to twist under the weight of rejection. The sting of being overlooked festered into jealousy, and his face fell in shame. God saw the storm brewing within and reached out with a warning. "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Did Cain heed this divine caution? Instead of seeking understanding, he allowed darkness to take root in his soul. He invited Abel into the field, perhaps under the guise of brotherly conversation. But far from any witness, something irreversible occurred. Blinded by envy and rage, Cain murdered his brother. The earth, which once yielded fruit through his hands, now drank the blood of his kin. This was no mere sibling rivalry. It was humanity's first murder, the first death, the first irreversible rupture of life, and with it, a shadow fell across human history. God, whose eyes see all, confronted Cain with a thunderous question. "Where is your brother Abel?" God did not ask because he did not know. But Cain responded with defiant evasion. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Can you feel the coldness in those words? They revealed a hardened heart, a spirit unwilling to bear responsibility. Yet God does not forget the innocent. What have you done? The Lord replied. Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Then came the sentence. The earth, once fertile under Cain's labor, would now resist him. No matter how hard he worked, the soil would yield nothing. He would become a restless wanderer, roaming the earth without stability or home. This judgment struck Cain deeply. For the first time, we see him break. My punishment is more than I can bear. He feared that, marked as he was, others would rise up and kill him in vengeance. But God, in an act of divine restraint and mercy, placed a mark upon Cain, a mysterious sign of protection. Despite his sin, God would not allow his life to be taken. Why would God protect a murderer? This paradox, where judgment meets mercy, raises questions that still echo today. Bearing this mark, Cain departed from the Lord's presence and settled east of Eden in the land of Nod, a place whose very name means wandering. He was alone, exiled, the first fugitive in human history, walking into a barren wilderness with no family, no community, no future. Adam and Eve remained near Eden. Abel was dead. Seth had not yet been born. Yet Genesis 4:17 states, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Wait, his wife? Scripture doesn't say Cain found a wife. It doesn't say he met a woman. It simply presents her as if her existence required no explanation. Here, the story takes a turn. At that distant moment in history, only Adam, Eve, and Cain inhabited the earth. So where did Cain's wife come from? Why does Scripture remain silent? If Adam and Eve were the first humans, who was Cain's bride? The biblical text gives no name, no origin, no lineage for this mysterious figure, as if she appeared from nowhere. This seemingly minor detail lifts the veil on one of the Bible's most perplexing enigmas. Even earlier, in Genesis 4:14, Cain cries out, "Anyone who finds me will kill me." His fear clearly implies the existence of other people capable of vengeance. But if Adam and Eve were the only humans, who was Cain afraid of? God's response deepens the mystery. Rather than dismissing Cain's fears, the Lord takes them seriously and places a protective mark on him. This again suggests the presence of others beyond Adam's immediate family. Why else would such a mark be necessary? Some scholars propose that Adam and Eve had many children whose names were not recorded in Scripture. Could Cain's wife have been one of his sisters? Genesis 5:4 states plainly, "After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Though unnamed, their existence is affirmed." Others speculate that God may have created additional human lines outside Adam and Eve's lineage. Though controversial, this view attempts to reconcile the biblical text with archaeological evidence of widespread early human settlements. Could God have created more than one human line? These questions grow even more profound when we consider ancient evidence of early human societies, burial sites, cave paintings, and tool use. Were these early people part of forgotten branches of humanity? Still, caution is warranted. The Bible does not affirm the existence of humans outside Adam and Eve's family. It focuses on a spiritual lineage leading to Noah. Yet could Scripture's silence be as telling as its words? What does it mean that Adam and Eve's daughters are never named, though they were essential for humanity's continuation? Let us delve deeper. What if Cain's wife was not merely a sister? What if her identity was meant to reveal something far greater about humanity itself? What if these forgotten daughters were never forgotten by God? The most widely accepted theory among scholars and believers offers both a practical and scripturally grounded explanation. Cain likely married a sister or close female relative from the same original lineage. Genesis never claims Adam and Eve had only Cain and Abel. The narrative leaves room for far more. Genesis 5:4 explicitly states Adam lived 800 years and fathered sons and daughters, opening the door to a large, fruitful family, many unnamed, yet necessary for populating the early earth. If all humanity descended from one couple, whom else could Cain have married in that ancient world but a sister or close kin? What we now consider problematic was then part of divine design. How else could the earth be filled, as God commanded in Genesis 1:28? Marriage among close relatives was not only acceptable in those early days, it was necessary. There were no nations, tribes, or communities beyond the first family. Throughout early biblical history, this pattern repeats. After the flood, only Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their sons' wives survived. Humanity had to rebuild from this small nucleus. Even Abraham, father of nations, married Sarah, his half-sister, Genesis 20:12. Isaac married Rebekah, his cousin. Jacob married Leah and Rachel, daughters of his uncle Laban. These were not exceptions, but examples of cultural continuity. Why did these practices later change? The answer lies in the development of God's law. The Mosaic Law, given through Moses over 2 millennia after Adam and Eve, Leviticus 18 prohibited marriage between close relatives. Could it be that God permitted what was necessary at the beginning, only to restrict it later as humanity grew in number and genetic complexity? In the Earth's infancy, human DNA had not yet accumulated generations of degeneration, so such unions carried none of the biological risks they do today. It was not scandal, it was survival. The biblical narrative, a source of wisdom for generations, often leaves certain figures in the shadows, those not central to the covenant storyline. Genesis 5:4 mentions Adam's other sons and daughters, yet names none. The focus remains on Cain, Abel, and then Seth. Why are the daughters unnamed? Because the Bible is not a comprehensive genealogical record. Its purpose is to tell the story of God's covenant, not to provide a strict chronology. Yet these gaps have sparked centuries of speculation. One ancient text, the Book of Jubilees, an apocryphal work sometimes called Little Genesis, attempts to fill them. Though not part of the canonical Bible, it holds historical value and is still revered in some religious traditions. According to the Book of Jubilees, Adam and Eve had 2 daughters, Awan and Azurah. Notably, Awan is named as Cain's wife. Her name is interpreted as iniquity or authority, perhaps reflecting the burden she bore as the companion of the world's first murderer, or perhaps symbolizing her inner strength. When Genesis 4:17 says Cain knew his wife, the canonical text gives no name. But Jubilees provides one and suggests a deeper connection to early human lineage. Could Awan have been Cain's sister, born after their exile from Eden? Some traditions suggest Cain did not marry immediately after his banishment, but decades, perhaps even 300 years later, by which time the Earth's population may have grown to dozens or hundreds, all descendants of Adam and Eve. As for Azurah, her name is associated with the heavens, the pure blue sky, or lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone symbolizing holiness and divine clarity. Her union with Seth marks a turning point in human history. After Abel's death and Cain's exile, the line of righteousness seemed broken, but God chose Seth to restore it. Eve herself expressed this hope in Genesis 4:25. God has granted me another offspring in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. In some traditions, Azurah was originally Abel's wife, adding profound depth to her story. After Abel's murder, she became a widow and later married Seth. Her life, marked by grief and restoration, mirrors the redemptive arc of Scripture itself. From their union came a lineage that carried forward humanity's spiritual thread. One of their descendants was Enosh, whose name means frail man. In his time, people began to call on the name of the Lord, marking the dawn of formal worship. Another descendant was Enoch, whose walk with God was so intimate that he never tasted death. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, it is written, "Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Yet the most extraordinary figure in Seth's lineage is Noah, the grandson of Methuselah. Noah was chosen by God not only to preserve humanity, but also every kind of living creature. From the line of Seth and Azura emerged worship, communion, endurance, and salvation. The daughters of Adam and Eve, so often overlooked, played invaluable roles. Awan became a bridge between exile and the continuation of the human race, while Azura became the matriarch of a righteous lineage that would one day give birth to Christ himself. As we delve deeper into these ancient texts, the pieces of this puzzle begin to form a clearer picture. By the time Cain considered marriage, there were already several sisters and nieces, women born to the many Given the extraordinary lifespans and fertility of the earliest generations, the earth was far less sparsely populated than we might assume. Over hundreds of years, families multiplied, and marriages among close relatives were both common and necessary. The Bible makes one essential point unmistakably clear. All humanity descends from a single original pair, Adam and Eve. In Acts chapter 17, verse 26, it is proclaimed, "From one man he made every nation of mankind." This is not merely a theological assertion, it is a declaration of unity, reminding us that every nation, every race, and every individual shares a common origin. It is important to remember that the Book of Jubilees is considered apocryphal. While its contents are intriguing, they should be approached with discernment. The Holy Bible was never intended to catalog every person who ever lived. Rather, it reveals what truly matters, the divine message of hope, salvation, and how we are called to live. As Isaiah 55, 8-9 declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." Though we may never receive definitive answers to every detail, we have been given enough to seek God, and that is the essence of it all. Faith is not built on knowing every name or solving every mystery. Faith is built on trust, on walking with God even when the path ahead is not fully revealed. Yet this much we can know with certainty. Cain's wife is more than a historical question. She is a mirror reflecting humanity's origin, grace after judgment, and the persistence of life even after condemnation. The same God who placed a mark of protection on Cain still sets his people apart for redemption. Their names may be lost to us, but their legacy flows through every generation, leading to hope, to restoration, and ultimately to Christ. So, who was Cain's wife? Perhaps the better question is this: who are we, that God would continue our story through them?